Have you ever noticed how the kindest people often get misunderstood the most? They give without asking, listen without interrupting, and carry everyone's weight. But somehow, they're the ones people resent. It's strange, isn't it? The more light you carry, the more shadows you seem to stir in others. It's like a traveler who rides his camel for days across the desert, complaining about the slow pace, the smell, the dust. He grumbles at every bump, never once thanking the animal that carries him forward. But when the camel collapses from exhaustion, he's forced to walk. And only then, feet burning, lips cracking, does he understand the weight that was never his to bear. Or think of a child who stuffs his dirty socks into the closet to avoid the smell, pretending it doesn't exist. But over time, the odor fills the room. That's what happens when people hide from their own dysfunction, then meet someone who reflects it back with calm, silent clarity. They don't thank the empath, they resent the mirror, because while you're offering warmth, they're measuring control. While you're healing, they're hiding. And instead of thanking you for the light, they blame you for what it reveals. But here's the truth. When you stop dimming yourself for their comfort, their resentment says more about them than you. Your empathy isn't the problem. Their insecurity is. So what happens when you finally realize that not everyone is drawn to your light for the right reasons? And more importantly, how do you protect your peace without losing your kindness? Stay with me until the end, because once you see what's really going on, you'll never apologize for your light again. Let's get started. Number 1. Their kindness feels like a mirror, and some can't face themselves. Let's talk about one of the most misunderstood truths about empaths: why some people secretly resent them, even when they've done nothing but show kindness. Empaths are naturally gentle, deeply observant, and quietly aware. They don't force themselves into the spotlight, yet their presence often stirs something uncomfortable in others. And it's not because empaths are doing anything wrong. It's because their calmness, their depth, their sincerity, it acts like a mirror. It reflects everything others are trying to avoid within themselves. Here's the truth. Empaths reflect what others try to hide. Their calm exposes restlessness. Their kindness reveals coldness. Their emotional intelligence makes others feel seen. And for someone who spent years avoiding their own reflection, that's terrifying. For those running from their wounds, the light of an empath isn't comforting, it's threatening. This is where Stoic wisdom comes in. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "It is not the light that blinds, but the eyes that cannot bear to see." That line cuts deep. The empath's light doesn't hurt anyone. It simply illuminates. But not everyone is ready to be seen. Some people have built their entire identity around defense mechanisms, sarcasm, arrogance, emotional detachment. When an empath enters the room, they don't match that energy. They don't play the game. Instead, they respond with stillness, with presence. And in that stillness, people begin to feel exposed. Let me tell you about someone I know. Let's call her Emily. Emily was the kind of person who remembered your favorite tea, noticed when your energy was off, and quietly helped people without needing recognition. But at her workplace, there was a woman named Kate who always treated her coldly. No matter how kind Emily was, Kate remained dismissive, always offering backhanded compliments or rolling her eyes when Emily spoke up. At first, Emily wondered if she was doing something wrong, but over time she realized Kate wasn't reacting to Emily, she was reacting to herself. Emily's quiet presence made Kate aware of her own emotional distance, and instead of facing it, she projected that discomfort outward. So how do you handle people who resent your light? First, don't dim it. Don't shrink to make others more comfortable. Second, recognize that their reaction isn't about you. It's about what your presence awakens in them. And finally, remember that your kindness is a gift, even if some people can't receive it. At the end of the day, not everyone can handle the mirror that empathy holds up. But that doesn't mean you stop being who you are. The right people will see your light and stand with you in it. The rest? Let them wrestle with their own reflection. You're not here to fix that. You're here to shine. Number 2. Empaths offer warmth that narcissists exploit. Let's talk about one of the most painful dynamics empaths face: being drawn into the orbit of narcissists and manipulators. At first, it might feel like a magnetic connection. The narcissist showers you with attention, mirrors your emotions, says all the right things. To an empath, it feels like finally being seen. But what's really happening beneath the surface is something far more dangerous. Narcissists don't come for your love. They come for your light. And the moment they feel they have it, the slow unraveling begins. Here's the truth. Those who lack empathy crave it most from others. Narcissists are emotionally hollow, so they attach themselves to those who feel deeply, hoping to siphon that warmth for themselves. They don't want connection. They want control. And empaths, with their natural desire to heal, listen, and give, become the perfect target. What looks like love is often just consumption. What feels like closeness is actually slow, calculated dependence. This is where Stoic wisdom offers a shield. Seneca once said, "The wise man gives, but never at the cost of his soul." That insight is everything. Stoicism teaches that compassion should never come at the expense of self-respect. Empaths often believe that giving more will eventually soften the other person, that understanding their pain will lead to mutual healing. But narcissists don't want healing, they want fuel. And when the fuel runs out, they either discard you or punish you for no longer supplying it. Let me share a story. A man I know, let's call him Brian, was one of the most emotionally intuitive people I'd ever met. He could read a room without a word being spoken. Then he met someone, her name was Rachel, who seemed just as emotionally deep. She told him everything he longed to hear, made him feel chosen. But as the months passed, something changed. Rachel became cold, critical, distant, except when she needed something. Brian started walking on eggshells, always trying to keep the peace, thinking he had done something wrong. But the truth was simple. She had never truly seen him. She saw his warmth, his giving heart, and she took. Brian wasn't in a relationship. He was being emotionally harvested. So, how do you protect yourself? First, recognize the signs. If someone only shows affection when they want something, that's not love, it's leverage. Second, stop explaining your kindness. If they don't value it, repeating yourself won't change them. And finally, set limits. Boundaries are not walls, they're gates. And not everyone should have a key. At the end of the day, your warmth is a rare gift. Don't offer it to those who only want to use it for their own comfort. Give freely, but wisely, because the light of an empath should never be used to fuel someone else's darkness. If you found this valuable, hit like and subscribe for more powerful insights. Number 3, they hold space without judgment, which feels like judgment. Let's talk about one of the most paradoxical truths about empaths: how their non-judgmental stillness can feel threatening to others. Empaths don't rush to fill silence. They don't try to fix everything or force their opinions. They simply hold space. They listen fully and patiently, letting others unfold without pressure. And while this might sound like comfort, for some people, that kind of presence becomes a mirror they'd rather avoid. Here's the truth. An empath doesn't interrupt, doesn't condemn. They simply listen. And that stillness becomes a confrontation. People expect judgment when they speak. They're used to defensiveness, interruptions, quick reactions. But when none of that comes, when the empath just sits there, calm, present, and quietly absorbing, it can feel like too much. Like the empath knows something they shouldn't, as if every word is being weighed, every silence echoing louder than it should. That's when the unease sets in. The calm becomes suspicious. The empathy becomes too deep. And suddenly, people start resenting the very person who gave them the space to be heard, because they weren't prepared to hear themselves. This is where Stoic wisdom steps in. Marcus Aurelius once said, "The calm mind reflects truth, the restless one only projection." That's exactly what happens in these moments. The empath's calm doesn't accuse, but it reflects. And those who are unsettled by their own words, their own choices, their own contradictions, begin to project. They assign judgment where there is none. They call the stillness cold or distant, not because it is, but because it reveals something raw. Let me share a story. A guy I know, let's call him Daniel, was the kind of person people opened up to without realizing it. He didn't speak much in groups, but when someone sat beside him, they'd find themselves confessing things they hadn't said out loud before. One of his co-workers once broke down during lunch, venting about his personal life. Daniel just listened, gently, attentively. He didn't offer cliches or advice, just presence. But a week later, the same co-worker began acting distant, defensive, even cold. Daniel was confused until he realized the man wasn't angry at Daniel. He was angry at how exposed he felt in Daniel's silence. So how do you handle this? First, don't abandon your calm just because others mistake it for judgment. Second, remember that your stillness holds power. It's not weakness. And third, don't take their discomfort personally. Some people fear being witnessed more than they fear being judged. At the end of the day, you're not here to fix or correct anyone. You're here to hold space with integrity. And if your presence becomes too honest for someone to handle, that's not a flaw, it's clarity. Keep holding space. The right people will recognize it as a gift, not a threat. Number 4, their boundaries are mistaken for weakness until they're not. Let's talk about one of the most miscalculated traits of an empath, their quiet, patient boundaries. Empaths are often underestimated. People assume that because they forgive easily, listen without interrupting, or give second chances without keeping score, they must be emotionally fragile. That they can be bent, manipulated, or pushed aside without consequence. But here's where the misunderstanding backfires. When an empath finally withdraws, they don't slam the door. They just disappear. And suddenly, the same people who mistook their softness for weakness realize just how strong silence can be. Here's the truth. Empaths often forgive, give chances, extend patience, not because they lack boundaries, but because they believe in understanding. They want to see the best in people. They believe wounds can be healed, and they'd rather create peace than win an argument. But every empath has a line, a point where they stop explaining, stop fixing, stop absorbing energy that's not theirs. And when that moment arrives, there's no fight, no announcement, just distance. This is when resentment begins to brew, not from the empath, but from the person who mistook their grace for surrender. Suddenly, the one who was taken for granted becomes the one whose absence is most felt. The patience that was once exploited is now gone, and the strength behind it, once invisible, becomes undeniable. That's where Stoic wisdom speaks truth. Seneca wrote, "Compassion without discipline is self-harm in disguise." That's the line empaths walk. They want to give, but not bleed. They want to understand, but not absorb. And when they finally walk away, it's not anger, it's clarity. A boundary drawn not in emotion, but in quiet strength. Let me tell you about someone. Let's call her Nicole. She was the kind of person who gave people chances long after others had walked away. At work, she covered for her colleagues' missed deadlines, listened when he vented, and defended him when others didn't. But eventually, she realized it was all one-sided. Her kindness was being used, not appreciated. So one day, she stopped. No confrontation, no bitterness. She just stopped showing up in the ways she used to. And the colleague? He spiraled. Not because Nicole had been cruel, but because he'd lost the emotional anchor he never respected until it was gone. So how do you handle this? First, know your boundary before it's tested. Second, give, but never past the point of self-neglect. And third, when it's time to walk away, do it with grace, not guilt. At the end of the day, an empath's strength isn't in how much they endure. It's in knowing when enough is enough. And those who resent that strength were never truly seeing you. They were only using the parts of you they could benefit from. Let them feel your absence. That too is a form of truth. If you've watched the video this far, don't forget to leave a comment with a "thank God" and give it a like if you enjoyed the content. Your support means a lot and motivates me to keep creating more interesting videos. I hope you find inspiration in them and that we continue learning together. Thank you for your support. Number 5. Their light disrupts power dynamics built on control. Let's talk about the kind of power most people overlook, the quiet influence of an empath. Empaths don't raise their voices. They don't seek attention. They don't try to dominate a room. And yet, without ever forcing it, they shift energy. Their presence softens tension. Their insight cuts through confusion. Their calm centers the chaos. And for people who thrive on control, on being the loudest, the sharpest, the most feared, that kind of influence is deeply unsettling. Here's the truth. Empaths don't dominate, yet they influence deeply. And that subtle power threatens those who crave control, because you can't manipulate someone who sees through you. You can't intimidate someone who doesn't play your game. And you can't control someone who stays rooted in their own truth. So what happens? The need for control turns to resentment, and the empath becomes the target, not because they did something wrong, but because their light disrupts the old order. This is where Stoic wisdom strikes clear. Epictetus said, "The greatest threat to control is quiet independence." That's what empaths bring into the room. Not rebellion, not ego, just grounded clarity. And for those used to winning through fear, pressure, or chaos, that's the one thing they can't compete with. So instead of growing, they resist. Instead of evolving, they try to dominate. But it doesn't work, because true influence doesn't come from control, it comes from presence. Let me tell you about a guy. Let's call him Marcus. He worked in an environment where authority was everything. His manager was the type who controlled through criticism, praise, and silence, all used strategically. But Marcus didn't respond the way others did. He stayed calm when pushed, kind when ignored, focused when undermined. And over time, his manager began to resent him, not for anything Marcus said or did, but for what he represented. A kind of emotional freedom that couldn't be manipulated. A type of leadership that didn't need titles to be respected. So how do you protect your peace when your calm threatens control? First, don't shrink to soothe someone else's insecurity. Second, remember that silent influence often speaks louder than forced authority. And third, never apologize for being grounded. That's your light, and it's meant to disrupt things built on fear. At the end of the day, your empathy isn't weakness, it's quiet power. And while some will be inspired by it, others will try to extinguish it. Let them try. You don't need control to lead. You only need presence. Keep showing up as you are, and let the ones who can't handle it reveal themselves. Number 6. They give without expectation, which highlights others' selfishness. Let's talk about one of the quietest forms of discomfort people feel around empaths. The discomfort of being shown who they really are. Empaths don't give to impress. They don't offer kindness as currency. They give because it's who they are, without keeping score, without looking over their shoulder for validation. And while you'd think this kind of generosity would be welcomed, it often triggers something darker: resentment. Here's the truth. Empaths show up without asking for praise. They help without needing credit. And that kind of unconditional presence becomes a mirror. A sharp, silent reflection of how transactional most people have become. The empath's grace quietly exposes how others only give to get, only listen to respond, only help when it benefits them. And when people feel that contrast between the empath's sincerity and their own motives, it creates tension. Not because the empath is judging them, but because they're judging themselves in the presence of someone who reminds them of a forgotten standard. This is where Stoicism speaks clearly. Marcus Aurelius said, "To serve sincerely is to unsettle the insincere." That's what happens. Empaths don't have to say a word. Their actions, their consistency, their quiet loyalty, it unsettles those who treat relationships like ledgers. And so, resentment grows. Not because the empath did too little, but because they did too much without needing anything in return. That kind of giving makes people question their own habits. And for some, it's easier to resent the light than reflect on the shadow. Let me tell you about someone I once met. Let's call him David. He was the kind of friend who remembered birthdays without reminders, showed up to help before being asked, and never expected payback. One of his friends, let's call him Eric, started acting cold after David helped him through a tough season. At first, David thought he had overstepped, but what really happened was this. David's selflessness made Eric uncomfortable. It made him confront how little he had done in return. And instead of gratitude, Eric chose distance. Because when someone serves sincerely, it doesn't just help, it reveals. So what do you do when your kindness creates discomfort? First, don't start giving with conditions just to make others comfortable. That's not who you are. Second, understand that some people avoid sincerity because it forces them to confront their own shortcomings. And third, keep giving from the overflow, not from obligation. At the end of the day, your light will expose what others try to hide. And while not everyone will be ready for that truth, it's not your job to dim it. Keep giving without expectation. Let your sincerity speak louder than resentment ever could. Number 7. They can't be changed, owned, or played, and that bothers people. Let's talk about the moment an empath stops playing the role others assign to them. Because for a long time, They're the open book, the soft shoulder, the one who forgives without question and listens without agenda. And because of that, people begin to assume things, that they'll always be available, that their compassion is endless, that their silence is agreement. But the moment an empath wakes up, when they finally see the patterns, the manipulation, the emotional extraction, everything changes. Here's the truth. Once an empath awakens to manipulation, their detachment is complete. They don't yell, they don't demand apologies. They simply stop explaining, stop engaging, stop giving energy to a dynamic that only takes. And for the people who are feeding off their openness, that silence feels like betrayal. Not because they loved the empath, but because they loved the access. This is the part no one tells you. People don't just miss you when you're gone, they resent you for leaving. Especially when your presence made their emotional shortcuts easier. When you stop reacting, they feel powerless. When you stop chasing clarity, they lose control. And when you stop giving, they're forced to sit with their own emotional bankruptcy. The resentment doesn't come from your absence, it comes from the loss of control. This is where Stoic wisdom gives clarity. Marcus Aurelius said, "To love only what happens, what was destined, no greater harmony." For the empath, that means letting go of the illusion that you can heal everyone, especially those who manipulate your kindness. It means understanding that freedom isn't just walking away, it's no longer needing closure. It's detachment without bitterness. Let me tell you about someone. Let's call her Emily. For years, she gave everything to a friend who constantly crossed lines. Every time she tried to set a boundary, the friend would guilt her, twist her words, or play the victim. But one day, Emily stopped responding. She didn't block them, didn't fight them, she just let the silence grow. And in that silence, the truth became louder than any conversation could. Her detachment wasn't cruel, it was the final act of self-respect. So what do you do when someone resents your freedom? First, accept that detachment will be misunderstood. Second, don't explain peace to those committed to chaos. And third, protect your inner stillness like it's sacred, because it is. At the end of the day, the empath's power isn't in how much they feel. It's in when they finally stop letting others shape what they feel. And once you stop being someone's emotional mirror, you become their blind spot. Let them sit with that. Your light was never theirs to own. If you believe this video can help others, give it a like. It helps the YouTube algorithm show it to more people. And don't forget to subscribe for more awesome content coming your way. Share your thoughts in the comments. I will definitely reply.